The mining station Kepler 442 floated in the dark void between stars, its metal hull scarred by decades of asteroid impacts and cosmic radiation. Captain Zuravelthon of the Altarian Republic watched the human vessel approach through her viewport, her four arms crossed in obvious displeasure. The ship was small, battered, and leaking atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. "Another refugee," muttered her second-in-command, Engineer Crix. His scaled hide rippled with annoyance as he checked the readings on his console. That makes the 15th human vessel this cycle. Their war with the hegemony is driving them into every corner of civilized space. Zara's elongated skull bobbed in agreement. The Altarians had maintained strict neutrality in the ongoing conflict between the Human Colonial Alliance and the Zarathi hegemony. It was a policy that served them well. Their mining operations continued undisturbed while the two powers tore each other apart across dozens of star systems. "Sir, the human ship is requesting emergency docking," reported Communications Officer Talman from her station. "They claim to have wounded aboard and are running low on life support." "Of course they are," Zara sighed, her translator converting the sound into something resembling disappointment in human standard. "Deny the request. Direct them to the neutral zone station at Proxima 7. We cannot afford to get involved." The communications officer hesitated, her tentacles twitching nervously. "Sir, Proxima 7 is 14 light hours away. Their life support readings indicate they won't survive the journey." Zara turned back to the viewport, studying the human ship more carefully. It was a civilian transport, not a military vessel, probably carrying families fleeing the war zone. The logical choice was clear. Maintaining neutrality was more important than the lives of a few dozen humans. The Altarian Republic had survived for 3,000 years by avoiding entanglements in other species conflicts. "Ma'am," Crick spoke up quietly, "I'm detecting 23 life signs aboard that vessel. 12 adults, 11 juveniles. Children." Zara's mandibles clicked together in frustration. Why did there always have to be children? "Open a channel," she ordered finally. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the human ship. A young woman with dark hair and tired eyes looked back at them, her uniform torn and stained with what appeared to be coolant fluid. Behind her, Zara could see other humans working frantically at damaged consoles. "This is Captain Elena Rodriguez of the transport vessel New Horizon," the human said, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. "We're carrying civilian refugees from the Vega colony. Our ship was caught in a Zarathi bombardment 3 days ago. We've lost main power, our FDL drive is down, and life support is failing." "Captain Rodriguez," Zara replied, "I am Captain Velthon of Kepler Station. While we sympathize with your situation, Altarian law prohibits us from providing aid to belligerents in an active conflict. I must direct you to the neutral zone facility at Proxima 7. The human captain's face fell slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Captain, with respect, our life support won't last another 14 hours. We have women and children aboard, including 3 pregnant mothers and a newborn infant. I'm not asking you to take sides in this war, just to honor the basic obligation one spacefarer owes to another." Zara felt the eyes of her crew upon her. In the background of the transmission, she could hear the sound of crying, unmistakably the wail of a human infant. Her 4 hands clenched and unclenched as she weighed her options. "Stand by, New Horizon," she said, cutting the channel. The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of the station's recycling systems. Zara could feel the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. Every decision had consequences, and in space, those consequences were often measured in lives. "The regulations are clear," Crix said softly. "We cannot provide aid to either side in the human-Zarathi conflict without risking our neutrality status. The Republic Council was very specific about this after the incident at Tau Ceti." "I know what the regulations say," Zara snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. Crix was only doing his job, reminding her of the legal realities they faced. But we're talking about children, Crix, innocent civilians who had no choice in this war. Innocent or not, they are still human, replied Dr. Voss, the station's chief medical officer. The elderly Altarian's voice carried the weight of experience. If we aid them and word reaches the hegemony, they could declare us non-neutral. Our mining concessions, our trade routes, our very existence out here depends on maintaining that status. Zara moved to her command chair, her mind racing through possibilities. The Altarian Republic's survival strategy had always been simple: stay out of other species' conflicts and focus on commerce and industry. They weren't warriors like the humans or conquerors like the Zarathi. They were builders, traders, miners. But that neutrality came at a cost, and sometimes that cost was measured in the lives of innocents. Sir, Talmin spoke up hesitantly. There might be another option. If we were to experience a sudden systems malfunction, say, a failure in our docking bay controls, it might be possible for the human ship to dock without our explicit permission. We would then be obligated to provide emergency humanitarian aid under galactic maritime law. The bridge crew exchanged glances. It was a thin excuse, but it might provide enough legal cover to protect the station's neutral status. Zara considered the proposal for a long moment. How long would it take to stage such a malfunction? She asked. 15 minutes to safely shut down the automated systems and make it appear accidental, Crix replied. But, sir, this is still a violation of our neutrality orders. If the Republic Council discovers what we've done, the Council is 50 light years away, Zara said firmly. And I'm the ranking officer at this station. Sometimes command means making the hard choices that others can't or won't make. She opened the channel to the human ship again. Captain Rodriguez looked even more haggard than before, and Zara could see sparks flying from damaged equipment in the background. Captain Rodriguez, we are experiencing technical difficulties with our docking systems. It appears you may be able to manually override our bay controls and dock your vessel. We cannot officially authorize this action, but we also cannot prevent it if our systems are malfunctioning. The human captain stared at her for a moment, clearly understanding the game being played. Understood, Captain Velthon. We'll attempt an emergency docking procedure. Thank you for your technical difficulties. 20 minutes later, the New Horizon limped into Kepler Station's main docking bay, its hull glowing red-hot from atmospheric entry damage. Emergency teams were already waiting as the airlock cycled open and the refugees began streaming out. Zara watched from the observation deck as her medical staff tended to the wounded humans. True to Captain Rodriguez's word, there were children among them, some barely old enough to walk, others clinging to their parents with wide, frightened eyes. The sight stirred something in Zara's chest that she couldn't quite identify. Dr. Voss approached her, his medical scanner still beeping from his examination of the refugees. 23 humans total, he reported. 12 adults, 11 juveniles as we detected. 3 of the adults have severe radiation poisoning from their ship's damaged reactor shielding. The pregnant females are stable, but exhausted. The infant appears healthy despite the ordeal. How long will they need to stay? The radiation cases will require at least 2 weeks of treatment with our medical facilities. The others could potentially travel in a few days, but their ship is beyond repair. The reactor is completely dead, and the hull has multiple critical fractures. Zara nodded, already anticipating the complications. 2 weeks was a long time to harbor refugees, especially if anyone came looking for them. Begin treatment immediately. And Crix? Yes, sir. Make sure our sensor logs show a convenient gap during the time the human ship arrived. Technical glitches happen, after all. Over the following days, life aboard Kepler Station settled into a new routine. The human refugees were given quarters in the civilian section, and many of them pitched in with station operations as a way to show their gratitude. Captain Rodriguez herself proved to be a skilled engineer, helping Crix repair some of the station's aging systems that had been giving them trouble for months. Zara found herself spending more time than she should have observing the human children. They were remarkably resilient, adapting quickly to the station's artificial gravity and finding ways to play even in the sterile corridors of the mining facility. Their laughter was a sound rarely heard on Kepler Station, and it seemed to lift the spirits of the entire crew. It was during one of these observations that she first encountered Marcus Chun, a 7-year-old boy whose parents had been killed in the Zarathi attack on Vega Colony. He was being cared for by his aunt, but he seemed drawn to the engineering sections of the station, watching the Altarian workers with fascination. "The machines here are different from the ones on Vega," he said to Zara one day, speaking with the directness that only children possess. "They're older, but they work better." "Why is that?" Zara knelt down to the boy's level, her forearms folding in a gesture of attention. "Sometimes older machines are built to last longer," she explained. "We Altarians believe in making things that will serve many generations." "My dad was an engineer too," Marcus said quietly. "He used to say that the most important machines were the ones that helped people." "He would have liked your machines." Something about the boy's quiet dignity in the face of loss touched Zara deeply. Here was a child who had lost everything, his parents, his home, his entire world, yet he still found wonder in the machinery around him. It reminded her why she had chosen to help the refugees in the first place. On the 10th day of their stay, the crisis Zara had been dreading finally arrived. Long-range sensors detected 3 ships approaching the station, Zarathi hegemony vessels on what appeared to be a standard patrol route. They were still 6 hours out, but their course would bring them close enough to scan the station thoroughly. "Options?" Zara asked her senior staff in an emergency meeting. "We could hide them in the lower mining sections," suggested Crix. "The ore deposits would mask their life signs from casual scans." "That only works if the Zarathi don't decide to board," Dr. Voss pointed out. "If they find humans aboard a supposedly neutral station, it would mean war with the Republic. We could claim their prisoners," offered Talman. "Say we captured them trying to raid our mining operations." Zara shook her head. "The Zarathi aren't stupid. They'd want to interrogate the prisoners, and they'd quickly discover the truth." She paced the small conference room, her mind working through increasingly desperate scenarios. Every option seemed to lead to either the deaths of the refugees or a diplomatic disaster that could drag the entire Altarian Republic into the war. It was Captain Rodriguez who provided the solution. The human woman had been quietly listening to their discussion, and when Zara asked for her input, she spoke with calm determination. "Let me take the children and go," she said simply. "My ship is dead, but we could take the emergency pods and scatter in different directions. The Zarathi might catch some of us, but at least a few might escape." "In emergency pods?" Zara stared at her in shock. "You'd be lucky to survive 12 hours in open space, let alone reach a safe system. It's better than dying here and taking your station down with us," Rodriguez replied. "You've already risked everything to help us. I won't let that sacrifice be for nothing." The humans' willingness to sacrifice themselves for the station that had sheltered them struck Zara like a physical blow. These people, who had every reason to be bitter and desperate, were still thinking of others before themselves. It was a level of nobility that she had rarely encountered in her long career. "No," she said firmly. "There has to be another way." The answer came from an unexpected source. Young Marcus Chun, who had been sitting quietly in the corner while the adults talked. "Why don't we tell them the truth?" he asked. Everyone turned to look at the boy, whose serious expression was almost comical on his young face. "What do you mean?" Zara asked gently. "Tell them you helped us because we needed help," Marcus said with simple logic. "My dad always said that when you do the right thing, you shouldn't be ashamed of it." Out of the mouths of babes, Zara thought. The boy's innocent wisdom cut through all their complicated plans and schemes to the heart of the matter. They had helped because it was right. Perhaps it was time to own that decision fully. 2 hours later, when the Zarathi ships arrived, Captain Zervelthon was waiting for them in her command center. She watched the sleek, predatory vessels take position around her station and waited for the inevitable hail. The face that appeared on her screen was that of a typical Zorathi commander. Reptilian features set in perpetual aggression, scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Commander Wisesthak's voice carried the authority of a species that had conquered half the galaxy through sheer brutality. Altarian Station, this is Commander Wisesthak of the Hegemony 3rd Fleet. We are conducting routine patrols of this sector and require permission to scan your facility for contraband. Permission granted, Commander, Zara replied evenly. Though I should inform you that we are currently providing humanitarian aid to human refugees under the provisions of galactic maritime law. The Zorathi commander's eyes narrowed to slits. Explain. 10 days ago, a human civilian transport experienced critical system failures near our position. Under maritime law, we were obligated to provide emergency assistance. The refugees remain aboard while we arrange transport to neutral territory. Show me, Wisesthak demanded. Zara activated the station's internal cameras, displaying the areas where the human refugees were housed. She made no attempt to hide them or disguise their presence. Captain Rodriguez and several other adults were visible, along with some of the children playing in a makeshift recreation area. The Zorathi commander studied the images intently, his scaled face revealing nothing of his thoughts. How many humans are aboard your station? 23 individuals, including 11 juveniles. You will transfer them to my ships immediately for processing. I'm afraid that's not possible, Commander. Zara kept her voice leveled despite the fear gnawing at her stomach. These individuals are under the protection of Altarian neutrality laws and galactic maritime regulations. They cannot be transferred without proper legal proceedings. Wisesthak's expression darkened. You test the limits of hegemony patience, Altarian. These humans are enemies of the state. Their presence on your station could be considered an act of hostility. They are refugees, Commander. Civilians fleeing a war zone. The hegemony itself is signatory to the Galactic Accords on Non-Combatant Protection. For several long moments, the channel remained silent except for the soft hum of electronics. Zara could feel her crew tensing around her, waiting for the Zorathi to open fire or demand boarding rights. Either action would force her to choose between her principles and her station's survival. Finally, Wisesthak spoke again. You have 48 hours to arrange transport for these refugees to neutral territory. If they remain aboard your station after that time, we will consider it an act of aggression. Do not mistake hegemony tolerance for weakness, Captain. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Zara staring at a blank screen. Around her, the bridge crew slowly began to breathe again. Sir, Crick spoke softly, was that wise? The Zorathi could return in force if they decide we violated neutrality. Perhaps, Zara replied, but sometimes standing for what's right is more important than playing it safe. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of frantic preparations. Using her station's limited communication array, Zara reached out to every contact she had in neutral space, searching for someone willing to transport human refugees. Most declined. The risk of Zorathi retaliation was too great. Those who expressed willingness were too far away to reach the station in time. It was Captain Rodriguez who once again surprised everyone with her resourcefulness. Working with Crix and several other engineers, she had been quietly attempting to repair her ship's communication system using spare parts from the station. On the second morning, she burst into Zara's office with excitement lighting up her tired features. I got through, she announced breathlessly. I managed to contact the Colonial Alliance Emergency Network. There's a rescue ship en route. Should be here in 36 hours. Zara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That's cutting it close, but it should work. The Zorathi gave us 48 hours. There's more, Rodriguez continued, her expression becoming serious. The Alliance wants to know how to contact you officially. They want to express their gratitude for what you've done. That's not necessary, Zara said quickly. We were simply following maritime law. Captain, with respect, you did a lot more than just follow regulations. You risked your station, your crew, your entire people's neutrality to help strangers. That's not something the Alliance will forget. 34 hours after the Zorathi deadline was delivered, a small Alliance corvette dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler Station. The timing was perfect, just close enough to the deadline to satisfy the Zorathi ultimatum, but with enough buffer to avoid accusations of deliberate delay. Zara watched from the observation deck as the human refugees prepared to board their rescue ship. Many of them stopped to thank individual crew members, their gratitude evident despite the language barriers. Dr. Voss had tears in his eyes as he said goodbye to the infant he had helped deliver during their stay. Young Marcus Chun was among the last aboard. He approached Zara with something clutched in his small hands, a crude drawing he had made using art supplies from the station's recreation center. It showed the massive bulk of Kepler Station with tiny figures standing together outside it. At the bottom, in a child's careful writing, were the words, "Thank you for helping us. I made this for you," he said solemnly. "So you don't forget that sometimes the right thing is the only thing." Zara accepted the drawing with all four hands, treating it like the precious gift it was. "I will treasure this always, young Marcus, and I hope you find a safe place to call home. Maybe I'll come back someday," the boy said with the confidence of youth. "When I'm grown up and can help other people the way you helped us." After the refugees departed, Kepler Station seemed strangely quiet. The corridors that had echoed with children's laughter now felt empty and sterile once again. Zara found herself looking at Marcus's drawing more often than she cared to admit, remembering the lessons in courage and compassion that a 7-year-old boy had taught her. 3 days later, a formal communication arrived from the Altarian Republic Council. They had heard about the incident with human refugees and wanted a full report. Zara spent hours crafting her response, carefully detailing the legal justifications for her actions while making it clear that she took full responsibility for the decision. The response, when it came 2 weeks later, was not what she expected. "Captain Velthon," the message began, "your actions at Kepler Station have been reviewed by the full council. While your decision to harbor human refugees was technically a violation of strict neutrality protocols, it was consistent with both galactic maritime law and the fundamental principles upon which the Altarian Republic was founded. Your conduct has been deemed exemplary, and you are hereby commended for upholding the highest traditions of Altarian service." The message went on to detail new guidelines for similar situations, essentially codifying Zara's actions as official policy. More importantly, it reaffirmed the Republic's commitment to humanitarian principles, even when they conflicted with political convenience. Months passed, and life aboard Kepler Station returned to its normal routine. The mining operations continued, trade ships came and went, and the war between humans and Zorathi raged on in distant star systems. Zara received occasional updates through official channels, but the conflict seemed as stalemated as ever. It wasn't until nearly a year later that she received an unexpected visitor. A small diplomatic courier ship requested docking clearance, claiming to carry an official representative of the Human Colonial Alliance. Curious, Zara granted permission and was surprised when Captain Elena Rodriguez walked through the airlock. The human woman looked different, no longer the exhausted refugee captain, but a confident officer in a crisp Alliance uniform. She carried herself with the bearing of someone who had found her place in the universe once again. "Captain Rodriguez," Zara greeted her warmly. "This is an unexpected pleasure. I trust you and the other refugees have found safe harbor." "We have, thanks to you," Rodriguez replied. "But that's not why I'm here. I've been asked to deliver something to you personally." She reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small crystal data storage device. "This contains the official gratitude of the Colonial Alliance for your actions last year. More than that, it contains something that I think will interest you greatly." Zara accepted the device with curiosity. "What kind of something?" "A message from Marcus Chun," Rodriguez said with a smile. "He's been accepted to the Alliance Engineering Academy on New Geneva." His entrance essay was about an Altarian mining station captain who taught him that doing the right thing was always worth the risk. That evening, alone in her quarters, Zara activated the crystal device. The main screen filled with the face of Marcus Chun, now 8 years old and obviously thriving in his new environment. Behind him, she could see the green hills and blue skies of New Geneva, one of the Alliance's most beautiful garden worlds. "Hello, Captain Velthon," the boy said, his voice carrying the same serious tone she remembered. "Aunt Elena said I could make this recording for you. I wanted to tell you that I haven't forgotten what you taught me, about doing what's right, even when it's hard. I'm going to be an engineer like my dad was, and like you show me engineers should be someone who builds things that help people." The recording continued for several minutes, with Marcus describing his new home, his studies, and his dreams for the future. But it was his closing words that stayed with Zara long after the message ended. "I promise that someday, when I'm old enough and strong enough, I'll find a way to help people the same way you helped us. Thank you for showing me that there are still good people in the galaxy, Captain. I hope I can make you proud." As the message ended, Zara found herself looking at the crude drawing she had pinned to her wall, the picture of Kepler Station with tiny figures standing together outside it. She had made her choice that day based on simple humanitarian principles, never imagining the far-reaching consequences of a single act of kindness. The galaxy was a harsh place, full of war and suffering and difficult choices. But sometimes, Zara reflected, one small act of compassion could plant a seed that might grow into something beautiful. She had helped a human boy once, showing him that there were still people willing to risk everything to do what was right. She could only hope that the man he became would remember that lesson when the galaxy needed it most. 23 years had passed since the refugees found shelter at Kepler Station. The galaxy had changed dramatically in those decades, though not always for the better. The Human-Zarathi War had expanded into something much larger and more terrible than anyone had imagined. What began as a territorial dispute between two species had evolved into a devastating conflict that now engulfed dozens of star systems and threatened to tear apart the very fabric of galactic civilization. Dr. Marcus Chun stood on the observation deck of the Alliance Research Facility on Titan, watching Earth's pale blue glow through the reinforced transparisteel. At 30 years old, he had fulfilled his childhood promise to become an engineer, but his path had taken him far beyond the traditional boundaries of that profession. He was now one of the Alliance's leading experts in defensive technologies and humanitarian engineering, specializing in systems designed to protect civilian populations from the horrors of modern warfare. The data pad in his hands contained reports that would have been unthinkable when he was a child aboard Kepler Station. Entire worlds sterilized by Zarathi plasma bombardment. Refugee fleets numbering in the millions, drifting through space in converted cargo haulers, and dying by degrees. Alliance colonies abandoned as the military fell back to more defensible positions, leaving civilian populations to face the hegemony alone. Marcus had tried to stay focused on his research, developing better shields and more efficient life support systems that could keep refugee ships alive longer. But as the war dragged on and the casualties mounted, he found himself thinking more and more about Captain Zaravelthon and the lesson she had taught him all those years ago. Sometimes she had shown him doing the right thing meant taking risks that went far beyond personal safety. Dr. Chun, the voice belonged to his research assistant, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, who had approached quietly across the observation lounge. "The Admiral is ready for your briefing." Marcus nodded, tucking the data pad under his arm. Admiral Patricia Santos was one of the few senior Alliance officers who still believed in fighting a war with moral principles intact. She had specifically requested Marcus for her staff after reading his papers on civilian protection protocols, and he had learned to respect both her tactical brilliance and her unwavering commitment to minimizing non-combatant casualties. The briefing room was filled with the usual collection of military officers, intelligence analysts, and civilian experts that comprised the Admiral's inner circle. But as Marcus entered, he noticed several faces he didn't recognize, beings from other species who were clearly not part of the Alliance command structure. Dr. Chun, Admiral Santos greeted him with a tired smile. "Thank you for joining us. I'd like you to meet our guests." She gestured to the non-human beings seated around the conference table. Representatives from the Neutral Worlds Coalition. They've come to us with some rather disturbing intelligence. The lead representative was an Altarian, the first Marcus had seen since leaving Kepler Station decades ago. She rose gracefully, her forearms folding in the formal gesture of respect he remembered from his childhood. "Dr. Chun," she said in accented but precise human standard, "am Ambassador Kes Velnara of the Altarian Republic. I believe you may have met one of my people many years ago, a Captain Zuravelthon." Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. "You know, Captain Velthon, she is my sister," the ambassador replied simply. "And she speaks of you often. The child who taught her that moral courage was more important than political expediency." Before Marcus could respond, Admiral Santos cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand. Ambassador, if you would brief Dr. Chun on the situation." The Altarian activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of the local galactic sector. Red zones marked areas under Zorathi control, blue showed Alliance territory, and green indicated the neutral worlds that had so far managed to avoid the war's devastation. "For the past 5 years," Ambassador Velnara began, "the Zorathi hegemony has been systematically testing the boundaries of neutral space. Small incursions, trade disruptions, aggressive patrol patterns near our borders. We have tolerated these provocations because we believe that maintaining our neutrality serves the greater good." She manipulated the display, zooming in on a cluster of star systems near the galactic rim. 3 weeks ago, that changed. Zorathi forces attacked and destroyed the Benthic station in the Proxima Centauri system. The station was clearly marked as neutral and was providing humanitarian aid to refugees from both sides of the conflict. Marcus studied the tactical display, his engineer's mind automatically calculating distances and defensive positions. "How many casualties?" "Over 15,000 beings," the ambassador replied quietly. "The Zorathi claimed it was harboring Alliance personnel, but our investigation found no evidence of military activity. It appears they simply decided that neutrality was no longer acceptable to the hegemony." Admiral Santos leaned forward in her chair. "The attack on Benthic was just the beginning. Intelligence reports suggest the Zorathi are planning a coordinated assault on all major neutral worlds within the next 6 months. They want to force everyone to choose sides, and they're confident that fear will drive most neutrals into their camp." "Including the Altarian Republic?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Ambassador Velnara's mandibles clicked together in what he recognized as a gesture of grim determination. "The Republic Council has been in emergency session for 2 weeks. There are those who believe we should negotiate with the hegemony, offer tribute in exchange for protection. But there are others who remember what neutrality truly means, not the absence of moral choice, but the commitment to stand for what is right regardless of personal cost." She turned to face Marcus directly, her large eyes reflecting the holographic display. "My sister told me once about a human child who lost everything, but never lost his sense of what was right. She said that child taught her more about courage than all her years of military training." "Dr. Chun, the Neutral World Coalition is prepared to fight for our independence, but we cannot do it alone. We need the Alliance's help." Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like a familiar burden. This was the choice Captain Velthon had faced all those years ago. Safety versus principle, pragmatism versus moral courage. The difference was that now the stakes weren't measured in dozens of lives, but in the survival of entire civilizations. "What kind of help?" Admiral Santos asked carefully. Ambassador Velnara manipulated the display again, highlighting a series of strategic positions throughout neutral space. "We have defensive installations at key choke points, but our military technology is decades behind both the Alliance and the hegemony. We need advanced weapons, trained personnel, and, most importantly, a coordinated defense strategy that can hold long enough for diplomatic pressure to end the war. You're asking us to violate your neutrality, Marcus observed. The moment Alliance forces enter neutral space, you become legitimate targets. We're already legitimate targets, replied another representative, this one a Rigelian whose crystalline features sparked with internal light. The Zarathi have made it clear that neutrality is no longer an option. We can either fight for our freedom or submit to their rule. There is no middle ground. Admiral Santos was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical implications of what was being proposed. Military aid to the neutral worlds would require a significant commitment of Alliance resources at a time when their forces were already stretched thin across dozens of fronts. Dr. Chun, she said finally, you've spent more time working with civilian defense systems than anyone else in the Alliance. In your professional opinion, is this feasible? Can we help the neutrals without compromising our own defensive positions? Marcus looked around the room at the faces watching him. Alliance officers who had dedicated their lives to protecting human space, alien representatives who had come seeking hope in the darkest hour their peoples had ever known. He thought about Captain Velthon, who had risked everything for a group of refugees she had never met. He thought about the drawing he had made as a child, showing tiny figures standing together against the darkness. It's more than feasible, he said quietly. It's necessary. The Zarathi strategy is to isolate and destroy opposition piece by piece. If we let them roll up the neutral worlds, we'll be facing their entire military might with no buffer zones and no allies. From a purely tactical standpoint, helping the neutrals is the smart choice. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But even if it weren't tactically sound, we should still do it. Because the moment we start choosing our moral positions based on military convenience is the moment we become no better than the hegemony. Admiral Santos nodded slowly. I was hoping you'd say that. Dr. Chun, I'm assigning you to head up the technical support mission to the neutral worlds. You'll work directly with Ambassador Velnara's people to coordinate defensive preparations. Admiral, with respect, I'm a researcher, not a field operative. You're a human who understands that sometimes the right thing is the only thing, Santos replied, unconsciously echoing the words from Marcus's childhood. And, right now, that's exactly what we need. 3 days later, Marcus found himself aboard a converted Alliance cruiser headed for the neutral zone. The ship's cargo bays were packed with defensive equipment, shield generators, sensor arrays, communication systems, and automated manufacturing units that could produce everything from ammunition to medical supplies. More importantly, the ship carried a team of specialists who would train neutral world personnel in their use. The journey to Altarian space took 2 weeks through hyperspace routes carefully chosen to avoid Zarathi patrol zones. Marcus spent most of that time reviewing intelligence reports and technical specifications, but he also found time to study what little information was available about Captain Velthon's current status. She was still in command of Kepler Station, which had grown from a simple mining facility into one of the most important industrial centers in Altarian space. Her decision to help human refugees years earlier had apparently set a precedent that had shaped Republic policy throughout the war. Altarian stations regularly provided aid to civilians from all sides of the conflict, maintaining their neutrality through strictly enforced humanitarian principles. When the Alliance Task Force finally arrived at Kepler Station, Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions. The mining platform had been expanded significantly since his childhood, with new docking bays and industrial modules that gave it the appearance of a small city floating in space. But at its heart, it was still the same place where he had learned his most important lessons about courage and compassion. Captain Zaravelthon was waiting for him in the main docking bay, her forearms folded in a gesture of formal welcome. 23 years had passed since their last meeting, but she seemed barely changed, perhaps a few more lines around her eyes, a slight graying of her chitinous skin, but still unmistakably the officer who had risked everything for a ship full of refugees. Dr. Marcus Chun, she said as he descended from the transport shuttle. "You have grown into the man I hoped you would become." "Captain Velthon," Marcus replied, surprised by how emotional he felt at seeing her again. "I've never forgotten what you taught me here." "And I have never forgotten what you taught me," she responded. "That sometimes a child's wisdom is clearer than an adult's caution." "Welcome back to Kepler Station, Dr. Chun. We have much work to do." Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into the task of preparing the neutral worlds for the coming assault. Working with Ambassador Velnara and a team of engineers from multiple species, he helped design a defensive network that could protect the most critical installations while maintaining the mobility needed to avoid the hegemony's overwhelming firepower advantage. The key insight came from studying the Zorathi's own tactical doctrine. They relied heavily on massive frontal assaults supported by superior technology and firepower. But their command structure was rigid, unable to adapt quickly to unexpected situations. If the neutral worlds could create enough chaos and uncertainty, they might be able to hold out long enough for the political situation to change. Asymmetric defense. Marcus explained to a gathering of neutral world military commanders. "We can't match their firepower, so we don't try. Instead, we create a network of hidden bases and mobile platforms that can strike quickly and then disappear. Force them to commit resources to hunting phantoms while we preserve our strength for the decisive battles." The plan required sacrifices. Some worlds would have to be abandoned temporarily, their populations evacuated to more defensible positions. Critical infrastructure would be dispersed across multiple locations to prevent single-point failures. It meant accepting short-term losses in exchange for long-term survival. Captain Velthon proved to be one of the most valuable allies in implementing the strategy. Her experience managing complex industrial operations translated well to coordinating the massive logistical effort required to relocate entire populations and rebuild defensive networks. More importantly, her moral authority among the Altarian people helped convince skeptics that the sacrifice was worthwhile. "You realize," she told Marcus one evening as they reviewed progress reports in her office, "that this plan may well destroy everything we've built over the past few decades. The Republic has thrived because we avoided taking sides in other people's wars. And now the war has come to you regardless," Marcus replied. "The Zorathi aren't interested in neutral trade partners. They want subjects or corpses, nothing in between." Zara's mandibles clicked thoughtfully as she studied a tactical display showing the current positions of known hegemony forces. "My sister believes we can hold them off for 6 months, possibly 8 if your defensive network performs as projected. But what then? Even if we survive the initial assault, the Zorathi will adapt. They always do." Marcus had been asking himself the same question for weeks. The defensive preparations were only buying time, not providing a permanent solution. Eventually, the neutral worlds would need something more than clever tactics and hidden bases to ensure their survival. "I've been thinking about that," he said slowly. "What if we're approaching this wrong? What if instead of just trying to survive the Zorathi assault, we use it as an opportunity to change the entire nature of the war?" "How do you mean?" Marcus activated his personal datapad and projected a strategic map of the entire galactic region. The hegemony's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They've spread themselves thin trying to control too much territory. If we could coordinate our defense with a simultaneous alliance counteroffensive. Zara studied the projection intently. "You're talking about using the neutral worlds as bait. Lure the Zorathi into committing major forces to our destruction, then hit them where they're vulnerable." "It's risky," Marcus admitted. "If the timing is off, or if our defenses don't hold long enough, entire worlds could be lost. But it might be the only way to break the strategic deadlock that's been dragging this war on for decades." The Altarian captain was quiet for several minutes, her 4 hands moving restlessly as she considered the implications. Finally, she looked up at Marcus with an expression he remembered from his childhood, the look of someone preparing to make a difficult but necessary choice. "How long will we need to hold?" "Minimum 3 months for the Alliance to reposition their forces. 6 months would be better. And if we agree to this plan, how many neutral worlds do you estimate we'll lose? Marcus felt the weight of the question like a physical blow. These weren't abstract tactical positions they were discussing. They were the homes of billions of sentient beings who had done nothing more than try to stay out of a war that had already consumed so much of the galaxy. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe none if we're lucky and skilled and the Zarathi make mistakes. Maybe all of them if things go wrong. But you believe it's worth the risk? Marcus thought about the refugee ships he had seen during his journey to Altarian space. Overcrowded vessels filled with beings who had already lost everything to the war's expansion. He thought about the reports of Zarathi occupation policies, the systematic elimination of local cultures, and the reduction of entire species to slave labor. I believe it's the only chance we have, he said finally. The alternative is slow extinction as the hegemony picks us off one by one. Captain Velthon nodded slowly. Then, we will need to convince the Coalition Council that the risk is acceptable. And Dr. Chun? Yes, Captain. We will need to ensure that your Alliance commanders understand what we're sacrificing for this plan. The neutral worlds aren't asking for charity or protection. We're offering to be the anvil on which the hegemony's expansion finally breaks. That's not a debt easily repaid. Over the next month, Marcus found himself at the center of increasingly complex negotiations between the Alliance High Command and the Neutral Worlds Coalition. Admiral Santos supported the plan in principle, but convincing the Alliance Joint Chiefs to commit to a massive offensive operation required extensive political maneuvering and strategic analysis. The breakthrough came when long-range reconnaissance missions confirmed what Marcus had suspected. The Zarathi were indeed massing forces for a coordinated assault on neutral space. Intelligence estimates suggested they were preparing to commit nearly 40% of their total military strength to the operation, including several of their most advanced battle fleets. If we let them complete this operation unopposed, Admiral Santos explained to the Joint Chiefs via secure hyperwave link, they'll control a continuous sphere of influence stretching from the Rigel system to the Galactic Rim. That gives them the strategic depth to wage a war of attrition that we cannot win. The counterargument came from General Harrison, commanding officer of Alliance forces in the Vega sector. And if this plan fails, we lose our most reliable intelligence sources in neutral space and face a Zarathi force that's been tested in battle and proven victorious. The political fallout alone could destabilize human space. Marcus listened to the debate with growing frustration. These officers were discussing the plan as if it were an abstract strategic exercise, weighing potential gains against acceptable losses without considering the real-world consequences for the beings who would bear the cost of failure. Generals, admirals, he interrupted finally, causing a surprise silence on the communication link. With respect, you're missing the most important point. This isn't about whether the plan is tactically sound or politically acceptable. It's about whether we're willing to stand by our principles when they're tested. General Harrison's image scowled from the holographic display. Dr. Chun, this is a military planning session, not a philosophy debate. No, sir, it's both, Marcus replied firmly. Because the moment we start treating our allies as acceptable losses is the moment we become everything we're supposed to be fighting against. The neutral worlds aren't asking us to save them. They're asking us to fight alongside them for something bigger than tactical advantage. Admiral Santos leaned forward in her chair. Continue, Dr. Chun. Captain Velthon risked her career and her people's neutrality to save 23 human refugees because it was the right thing to do. She didn't ask what was in it for the Altarian Republic or whether helping us served their strategic interests. She helped because people needed help and she had the power to provide it. Marcus looked around the conference room at the faces watching him. Some skeptical, others thoughtful, all of them carrying the burden of decisions that would affect billions of lives. The neutral world are making the same choice now, he continued. They're willing to risk everything they've built to fight for the principle that no single power should be allowed to dominate the galaxy through force. If we abandon them now, we're not just losing potential allies. We're proving that our own principles only matter when they're convenient. The debate continued for several more hours, but Marcus could sense the mood shifting. Admiral Santos and several other senior officers had been looking for a way to break the strategic deadlock, and the neutral world's offer provided that opportunity. More importantly, the moral argument resonated with officers who had joined the alliance to protect freedom and democracy, not to play cynical power politics. The final vote was closer than Marcus would have preferred, but the Joint Chiefs ultimately approved the coordinated operation. Alliance forces would begin repositioning immediately, while the neutral world prepared their defenses for what everyone knew would be the most desperate battle in galactic history. As the planning session ended and the various officers signed off the communication link, Admiral Santos approached Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "That was quite a speech, Dr. Chun. You reminded them of why they became soldiers in the first place." "I hope it was enough," Marcus replied. "The neutral worlds are betting everything on the hope that the Alliance will keep its word when things get difficult." "They will," Santos said firmly. "Because you're right about one thing. This is about more than tactics or strategy. It's about what kind of galaxy we want to live in when this war is over." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders once again. In 6 weeks, the Zarathi assault would begin, and everything they had worked to build would be tested in the crucible of battle. Success would require not just military skill and technological superiority, but the kind of moral courage that Captain Velthon had shown him so many years ago. As he prepared to return to Kepler Station for the final defensive preparations, Marcus found himself thinking about the drawing he had made as a child, tiny figures standing together against the darkness. Soon, that childhood metaphor would become a terrifying reality, and he could only hope that the bonds of trust and mutual respect he had helped forge would be strong enough to withstand the storm that was coming. The Zarathi assault began exactly when Alliance intelligence had predicted it would, on the 3rd day of the Galactic Standard Month, with devastating precision that spoke to months of careful planning. Marcus Chun watched from Kepler Station's command center as the first wave of enemy ships dropped out of hyperspace across 17 different star systems simultaneously. The holographic tactical display showed the scope of the hegemony's commitment in stark detail. Massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the largest Alliance vessels, accompanied by swarms of smaller ships that moved with the coordinated precision of a single organism. The Zarathi had indeed committed nearly half their total military strength to this operation, betting everything on a quick, decisive victory that would end neutral resistance once and for all. Sensor reading confirms over 200 major vessels in the first wave, reported Lieutenant Kim, who had requested assignment to the neutral world's operation despite the obvious dangers. Energy signatures suggest they're carrying full planetary bombardment loads. Captain Velthon stood at the center of the command center, her 4 arms moving continuously as she coordinated responses across the entire Altarian defensive network. 23 years of experience had taught her to project calm confidence even in the face of overwhelming odds, but Marcus could see the tension in her movements as reports poured in from across neutral space. Rigel's system reports contact with the enemy vanguard, announced communications officer Talman, her tentacles dancing across her console with practiced efficiency. They're requesting immediate evacuation support for the civilian population centers. Denied, Velthon replied without hesitation. All evacuation transports are committed to predetermined schedules. The Rigelians knew this was coming. If they waited until now to begin evacuations, they'll have to accept the consequences. It was a harsh decision, but a necessary one. The defensive strategy Marcus had helped design depended on careful resource allocation and strict adherence to established protocols. Every ship diverted to emergency evacuations was one less vessel available for the coordinated defense that would determine whether the neutral worlds survive the next 6 months. "Captain," Marcus said quietly, moving to stand beside her at the command console, "the Zarathi are following their standard doctrine so far. full-scale assault on primary targets while ignoring secondary installations. If the pattern holds, they'll commit their reserves to breaking through our strongest defensive positions. Velthon's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement, which gives us approximately 72 hours before they realize our strongest positions are decoys and begin hunting for our real defensive assets. Dr. Chun, are your mobile platforms ready for Phase 2? Marcus checked his personal data pad, reviewing the status reports from hidden bases scattered throughout the neutral zone. The past 6 weeks have been spent not just building fixed defenses, but creating a network of mobile platforms that could strike quickly and then disappear into the void between systems. All platforms report ready status, he confirmed. But, Captain, once we begin Phase 2, there's no going back. The Zarathi will know they've been deceived, and their response will be intense. The response is already intense, Velthon pointed out, gesturing to the tactical display where red icons mark the positions of burning space stations and devastated planetary defense systems. The only question is whether we can make them pay an acceptable price for their aggression. The first day of the assault unfolded exactly as Marcus had predicted. Zarathi forces concentrated their attacks on the heavily fortified positions that the neutral worlds had deliberately made visible to enemy reconnaissance. Massive space stations and planetary defense networks absorbed tremendous punishment while inflicting surprisingly little damage in return. To outside observers, it looked like the neutral worlds were being systematically destroyed with barely token resistance. Alliance intelligence networks reported minimal defensive effectiveness and rapidly deteriorating tactical situation. Even some of the neutral world commanders began questioning whether their faith in the defensive strategy had been misplaced. Marcus spent the first day moving between different command centers, coordinating the carefully choreographed retreat that was designed to look like a rout. Every destroyed installation, every evacuated position, every apparent tactical failure was actually part of a complex deception designed to draw the Zarathi deeper into neutral space while keeping their real defensive assets hidden. It was exhausting, demoralizing work. Marcus found himself watching the systematic destruction of installations that had taken months to build, knowing that each lost position represented not just strategic assets, but the hopes and dreams of the beings who had called those places home. Late on the second day, as he reviewed casualty reports in a temporary command post aboard a converted cargo hauler, Marcus received an encrypted communication from Admiral Santos. The Alliance forces were in position and ready to begin their counteroffensive, but the Admiral wanted confirmation that the neutral worlds could hold out for at least another 4 months. Honestly, Admiral, Marcus replied via secure hyperwave link, I don't know. The Zarathi are hitting us harder than our worst-case projections anticipated. We're losing infrastructure faster than we planned, and some of our people are starting to crack under the pressure. Santos' image flickered slightly as interference from a nearby battle disrupted the transmission. Dr. Chun, I need a straight answer. Can you hold or not? Marcus looked around the cramped command center at the faces of beings from a dozen different species, all united by their determination to resist hegemony domination. They were tired, scared, and facing odds that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. But they were still fighting, still coordinating their defenses with the precision born of absolute necessity. We can hold, Admiral. The question is whether you'll be ready to take advantage when we spring the trap. We'll be ready. Just make sure there's something left to save when we arrive. The communication ended, leaving Marcus alone with his doubts and the terrible responsibility of coordination decisions that would determine the survival of entire civilizations. He thought about Captain Velthon, who had faced a similar choice decades earlier with much smaller stakes. The courage she had shown then seemed almost quaint compared to what was being asked of the neutral worlds now. Phase 2 of the defensive plan began on the morning of the third day, just as Zarathi reconnaissance forces began to suspect that something was wrong with their seemingly easy victories. Hidden weapons platforms throughout the neutral zone suddenly came to life, launching coordinated attacks against enemy supply lines and communication nodes. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Zarathi forces that had been advancing confidently through what they thought was broken space suddenly found themselves under attack from directions they hadn't even considered. Supply convoys that had been moving with minimal escort were destroyed by weapons platforms that appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. Marcus watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction as red enemy icons began disappearing across the battlefield. The mobile platforms were performing exactly as designed, striking hard and fast before melting back into the cosmic background noise that made detection nearly impossible. Enemy response patterns suggest they're reallocating forces from the primary assault to anti-radar operations, reported Lieutenant Kim from her position at the sensor console. They're pulling back approximately 30% of their forward elements to protect their supply lines. Captain Velthon studied the tactical readouts with the expression of a professional military officer evaluating a complex operation, which means they'll need to either slow their advance or accept higher losses at their primary targets. Either choice works to our advantage. But the Zarathi adaptation was faster and more effective than anyone had anticipated. Within 6 hours of the first mobile platform attacks, enemy forces had deployed new sensor arrays and escort protocols that made supply line raids much more costly and dangerous. We're losing platforms faster than projected, Marcus admitted as he reviewed the latest casualty reports. The Zarathi are adapting their tactics faster than we hoped. At this rate, we'll burn through our mobile assets in less than 2 months. Velthon was quiet for a long moment, her 4 hands moving restlessly as she processed the implications.